Today I'm really excited to have our next guest joining us. And she just presented at the Maths Conference, MathsCon 25 last week, and there was so much stuff that came out from it. It was absolutely fascinating, and I knew I just had to get her online to a live stream, get her back onto this live internet thing. So thank you very much for joining us, Limes Wright. So yeah, I'm just going to ask you very quickly to introduce yourself, and I do know that you've got a background in research in maths anxiety as well, so perhaps you can mention that as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry we're late. As those who came to the workshop last week, I guess perhaps technical difficulties is my thing now for starting, but I teach maths GCSE resit at a sixth form college. I did a master's a couple of years ago, 2019, and I'm really interested in maths anxiety and working memory, and so I sort of took the opportunity to delve into it. So I did a master's in Neuroscience Education. Although I teach maths, I did a subject enhancement course because my degree is actually in psychology. So I found that doing my master's, it meant I had a lot of prior knowledge that I could build on. What I did was, because I love psychology, particularly cognitive psychology, but it's all very abstract. You can't really pin it down. So I wanted to go down the neuroscience route so that I've actually got the brain parts, if you like, to pin the theories and cognitive models onto, particularly working memory. And I found that it's really benefited my understanding. And I work, as I say, with GCSE resit students. So a lot of them very maths anxious. So it's very personal to me. When I went into teaching, I always knew I wanted to sort of support the more vulnerable, if you like, the ones lacking in confidence, whether it's just not necessarily learning difficulties, but I knew that there were a lot of students sort of slipping through the net with a real fear of maths, and they were the ones that I wanted to reach. Hence, doing that master's as well to see, right, what else can I learn to build on my psychology knowledge to benefit my students.
Wow, that's an incredible background and what you do as well, right? So, and yeah. This is one of the reasons why I invited you is I'm in a similar field. I teach students with learning issues, dyscalculia, dyslexia, all the sort of D things, and primary maths, secondary maths, etc. And what I'm most passionate about, what drives me most, is the children who've been left behind, so to speak, and who can be several years behind, and is teaching them the correct maths in the correct sequence suited to their starting point. But before you can even do all of that, there is a whole bunch of other social and emotional issues to do with anxiety, to do with just lack of belief in themselves. And this is the thing that really kind of appealed about your workshop to me, because of course we talk about pedagogy and didactics and technical elements of teaching, but learning for the most of it is actually a social endeavor, especially when it's happening in this live situation in a classroom or in one-on-one with a person. And we really can't learn anything unless we like the person we're learning from. And that goes student to pupil, colleague to colleague. We don't even take CPD from people we don't like from. And I think one of the things that you put, I put it on a quote on Twitter, and children will not learn unless they feel secure in the learning environment. They won't take risks, and that was such an important thing that it's kind of not discussed. It's not discussed enough, and it's kind of an underlying structure, right? The safety net you provide.
No, I completely agree. I think that I've been on Twitter about a year. Actually, no, not even a year. I think it was about May. So during lockdown, I'd never been on Twitter before. Everyone raved about it, saying, "Oh, you've got to go on it." So I just thought, right, okay, I'll take the chance now. And I've been quite taken aback at the sheer drive in cognitive science. I'm sort of a cognitive psychology advocate myself, obviously cognitive neuroscience as well. However, I just feel this massive drive for just cognition. Well, that's just one perspective of learning. And exactly as you said, Atul, is that, well, also there's the social emotional side. And from my workshop last week, I was talking about how, yes, we've got the thinking brain, which helps us with our learning, but actually the emotional brain can overpower and overwhelm, hence being able to overpower the thinking part of the brain, which is actually the prefrontal cortex. So that is something we cannot afford to neglect in when we come to teach our learners, our children, because if they are in that fear situation, their thinking brain will be disengaged. So I was quite taken aback by this, as I say, this sheer sort of mindedness just into cognitive science, when actually there's a much bigger picture out there. And so last week I was talking about, social relationships, social learning theory, how children observe those around them. So as teachers, from a pedagogical point of view, we know about worked examples, about modeling, etc. But that's not actually just the maths. We are, as teachers, have to model our attitudes, our behaviors, our emotions for our children to learn. So we have to be really, really careful, because social learning theory, Bandura, is such that children sort of observe those around them, and they imitate the attitudes, emotions, and behaviors of those they identify with. So, of course, teacher, as you said, Atul, well, obviously, as a teacher, generally, you're not trying to be the children's friend, but they have to like you and trust you for you to take them down a path of challenging learning. Otherwise they won't follow you, because they'll be fearful. They won't feel secure enough that you won't let them down, or they need to trust you. There is a massive element of trust there.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it reminds me of one of the in Mark McCourt's book, Teaching for Mastery, and his CPD courses, and there is an implicit, and sometimes it needs to be explicit contract between the pupil and the teacher, that like learning maths is difficult. It's very hard. There are going to be times when you'll be out of your comfort zone, but the promise to the teacher is that I'll make the effort, and I will trust your judgment. I will trust your authority on the subject. But likewise, it's also the other way around, where the teacher will only give the right information at the right time, and also kind of respect the position of the learner where they are. So there's this contract between, and without that in place, we know what happens, right? Things don't work out. You get anxiety issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sorry, Atul, but I missed quite a bit of what you said there, because my Wi-Fi I've no idea what's happening today. But anyway, I've got the gist of it. But no, I agree with you. Having to start where the learners are, from their own starting point. I think research has shown that within one class there can be 7 years difference between the lowest and the highest pupil in the class. 7 years in one class, and they are in the same age, etc. So that just shows how difficult it is, as teachers, for us to try and take into account everything that we've got to think about. So obviously I'm very, very passionate about helping our disadvantaged children, or even if they're not disadvantaged, but for some reason they're not sort of getting the math support that they need. And of course, the trouble is, the one thing as well is that in my study, in my research, talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivated pupils are the ones who love learning for its own sake. So from a maths perspective, they love maths, they think it's important, so they are intrinsically motivated, and that means that they are they are actually interested in persevering, working through challenges, because they just love the learning for its own sake. Whereas those who are extrinsically motivated, so pupils who think, right, what's this going to do for me? Is it for good grades or whatever? They're less likely actually to ask for help, because they fear the negative judgment from the teacher. So even though they need more help, they won't ask for it, because they don't want that horrible feeling of sort of, as I say, being judged. And none of us enjoy being judged negatively. So that's again something else we've got to think about from the learner's perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So good that you define these things so clearly. So for me, it's it's kind of a wishy-washy thing, but the from your research, extrinsic and intrinsic. Yeah, I mean the thing before there was a glitch was basically I was saying there is this kind of implied contract and understanding between teacher and pupil that learning maths is hard. You will be out of your comfort zone, but you trust the teacher to be the authority on the subject and emotionally to be at all times aware to not push you too far out of your comfort zone. And that the effort is what's going to lead to the results. And likewise, the teacher also should understand actually not to push them too far, to understand or find the right starting point. And then you just very elegantly explain that through motivation with extrinsic and intrinsic. So yeah, let's get into a little bit more specifics. I mean, how would you define maths anxiety? Perhaps you would define anxiety first and then maths anxiety, or we can go into a sort of some more.
Right. Well, there are different definitions of maths anxiety. So obviously, maths anxiety is a subset of general anxiety. But maths anxiety also has quite an overlap with test anxiety. So maths anxiety it has two dimensions, if you like. The cognition are thoughts, so worrying thoughts, etc., and also the emotional side, or affective factors, as it's known. So the actual feelings of anxiety. So that's why it's so important not to just think about cognitive science when it comes to maths. We cannot afford to neglect the emotions, because the emotions, as I say, can derail the cognitive resources we need to actually learn maths. So maths anxiety is actually distinct from other anxieties. It's only related to maths, so it's number related, but it does, as I say, it does have overlaps with test anxiety. So when maths anxiety is measured, you do have to make sure that you are using a test that is reliable and valid. So this is for anything that when measuring in psychology, in psychological research, you want to make sure that the test, whatever you're using to measure the concept, the psychological concept, is reliable, meaning that if whoever it is fills it in today and then fills it in next week, they'll be pretty consistent. You're not going to have completely wildly different results. Likewise, it has to be valid. So valid means you are actually measuring what you claim to be measuring. So I looked at the transcript last week, for example, from last week's workshop, and a few people said, "Oh, how do you measure maths anxiety?" Well, basically, it's with measuring any other psychological concept, in that you generally use standardized tests. You cannot just create one yourself. You have to make sure that it is reliable, it's been valid, and this is by testing it on big samples. So it would never occur to me, for example, to write my own, because I know, well, how can I tell if it's reliable or valid? So I basically, so again, when I was measuring maths anxiety, I made sure I really looked into, right, what are the different measuring tools and which ones would suit my particular sample. So as I say, so maths anxiety, you have to really make sure you consider both the cognitive and the emotional aspects. And as I say, lots of different definitions, but the one that I put on my workshops, I don't know if you've got access to it at all, but that seems to be the most all-encompassing one. That is used by a lot of maths anxiety researchers.
Right.
The
Yeah,
one
I've
by
got that.
The one by Richardson and Sewin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's on feelings of tension and anxiety that interfere with the manipulation of numbers and solving of mathematical problems in a wide variety of ordinary life and academic situations. Richard
That's
and
right. So yeah, so it shows it's not just in, it does, maths anxiety isn't just in math lessons. It's every day. Another thing as well, there is a bit of a critique of measuring maths anxiety as well by Anne Dowker. She's at Oxford, and basically she said that, well, maths anxiety isn't just a homogenous thing, because not all maths is the same. You know, we've got visuals, we've got abstract, we've got arithmetic. So they're all very different. And so there isn't only one type of maths anxiety, because there isn't only one type of maths. You may be anxious, for example, by algebra, sort of doing algebra, but you might actually really enjoy graphs or something like that. So again, it's not that clear cut, because there's so many different types of maths. And also, I've talked about working memory. Working memory, we've got the verbal and the visual spatial component. And so again, the different types of maths will be dealt with by the different parts, the different pathways in working memory as well.
fantastic. I mean, the questions are coming in, so I'm gonna just make this whole thing. So
Oh right, right. I just assumed no one was
no,
asking.
no, they're coming in. Yeah, I'll just make it responsive in the way
That would
teaching
be
can be
lovely.
responsive.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions, guys.
Yeah,
Hope I can,
fantastic. So
answer.
we've got. I'll go with the questions first in the order they came in. Got Darren Elgar, who's on Twitter, having worked as a teaching assistant in years 1 to 5, 2009 onwards. Maths lesson in 1 and 2 were get on the carpet, teacher talks, and shows for 10-15 minutes. I could see the pupils losing the thread and not understanding. Loads of working memory and anxiety issues. Moving on too quickly is a massive problem. Does this still happen in the UK?
Oh,
Quite a lot in there.
yes, there is a lot in there. I think that's it, isn't it? It's, as teachers, we have to be very aware of our children's body language, their facial expressions. All the clues are there as to, as Darren said, I could see, you know, they're switching off. And obviously in the early years, well, their working memory is still developing. So, and the prefrontal cortex as well, where, you know, we've got attention and working memory, actually the central executive of working memory is, you know, it basically inhibits irrelevant information, etc. But young children, their working memories are still developing. It's not fully developed till about age 14, the working memory. So they don't have all the attention span that we would have, you know, growing up, because that part of the brain is, the prefrontal cortex is actually where the, you know, the higher cognition is. So planning, reasoning, decision making, switching between tasks. Well, that doesn't actually fully develop until about age 25. And also that deals with monitoring risky behaviour. So young children, they can't, their attention isn't that long, and so teachers have to be really, really aware of, right, what's happening with my, you know, the children I'm teaching, what their body language, etc. So you can see the teacher has a lot to do. And in the UK, unfortunately, I don't know if there are other primary school teachers watching, if they can say whether this happens, because obviously I've worked in secondary school and now in a sixth form college. So unfortunately, I don't know what happens in terms of maths in primary. But if anyone wants to join in and just give us what happens, that would be great.
Yes, I've got a I've got a panel of primary teachers coming up actually very soon. I'm just organising that for another Maths Chat Live, so I look forward to incredible insights actually at that early But it's such a. I mean, you can ask me. I tutor some primary students live, one-on-one, and it's so good to hear that. Like, from a developmental point of view, I can teach a 16-year-old who's dialing number bonds for whatever reason. They can't number bond and they've got to 16, and it's completely different to teaching a 7-year-old number bonds, because they've got to the age of 7 and they're not number bonding. Is developmentally they are so different. Our 16-year-olds had a lot more life experience, and they can use bridging, like, based on they might not understand what percentages mean, or a lot of other number stuff mean, but they've heard it. They've despite not understanding it, they've had that experience, and they have just more just more developed cognition skills and longer attention spans, which are working memory, etc. So I'm often able to teach the number bonds to 16, even 18-year-olds. I've got an 18-year-old student, just much faster, because of that they're pretty much adults.
Yeah,
Whereas,
absolutely. I mean, that is a massive, that we can't treat all children the same, because, as you say, the developmental stage that they are at. Having said that, there are theories of developmental stages like Piaget's, stages, but of course, it's not necessarily linear either. So it doesn't, you can't, it's not a case of you go from this, then to this, to this, because there might be little jumps. So it's not a complete linear process either. So it's all very complex, basically. So we can do the best we can.
Yeah, there's so many variables, but it's great. It's great that we are these things are being sort of thought about separately and explicitly, and we're actually just talking about this one thing. Yeah, I'm going to dive into some other questions. So thanks for that, Darren. I've got Julia, Test Maths. She was on a panel, and she works in works in further education, so very very similar to what you do. And she says, I've recently seen a great idea from Mars Maths, who asks students to write a letter to Maths. Dear Maths, I've always misunderstood you. You have confused me, etc. So, are there any effective strategies you can think of to spark that initial conversation with a pupil? So that's Mars Maths. She was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, Marshida. Very good strategy, actually.
Oh, no, yeah, I really like that. Yeah. I mean, I think basically it's more. The trouble is, once they've got to that age, they've had this. They might have had up to 11, 12 years of negative maths experiences. So it's really nice for them to offload it. And it's just responding to it in that every child's different. And so their experiences will all be different. There might be themes that link them all, but we can't sort of just we can't deny their perception of their experiences. We might have a different idea, but really we need to accept, okay, that's how you feel about that, and be more accepting. So I think from what Julie said about Mars Maths, I think that's really nice. For me, what I tend to do, I mean, I've only been doing GCSE resits for about a year. Well, actually it was January of last year, so it's not actually for very long. So this year is actually the first year I've actually had my own classes right from the start. So last year I inherited them from another teacher, and so this year's my very first lot of classes where I've started. So what I like to do to sort of develop the trust, if you like, is to first of all let them know where my passions are, who I am as a teacher, and they seem to really like it when I talk to them about, right, I'm really interested in maths anxiety and working memory, because then they know, okay, my teacher's qualified to talk about this. So, and if I can, develop that relationship with my students, they will trust me when I say to them, oh, no, don't do this because, and I'll explain why. And then they take that on board. But it's nothing fancy like Mars Maths, I'm afraid. But as I say, it's only because I've not actually been doing GCSE resits for that long. So I'm sort of still learning myself, but I am finding that the interpersonal relationships are absolutely key. And for me, not to dismiss anything the students say to me about, why they don't like maths or whatever, I just take a keen interest because I am personally interested in understanding why, gaining insight into how they have developed these opinions and ideas and dislikes, and why they're so, what's got them so emotional about maths. So for me, it is just the interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which brings us back to that whole social emotional side again,
Yeah,
doesn't it? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Um, and presumably this is obviously the students' kind of environment matters not just in the classroom, but with the parents, right? So how many times have we heard parents say, "I was no good at maths," or so therefore, like, I don't think, yeah, that the parents themselves say I was no good at maths, and that must influence the child, right, as well. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, Atul, you went again. I think you were talking about parents. It's not just about in the classroom, but it's about parents. Is
Yeah,
that
that's
is
it.
that
Yeah,
right?
when parents also
Yeah.
say, some parents, obviously not all parents. There's I've met lots of parents who are very very positive about maths, but yeah, when the parents say I was no good at maths, or my experience of maths was so and so, it wasn't a positive experience, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So going back to Bandura's social learning theory, um, because children take on board those around them with their emotions, attitudes, or whatever. So it's not just the teacher, but their home life, exactly as you've said, Atul. And studies have found that parents who help their children with maths homework, have reduced maths anxiety, but only if those parents aren't maths anxious themselves. Maths anxious parents have been found, if they frequently help their children become maths anxious themselves. It affects negatively their performance. So that again supports social learning theory, in that their children will take on board their parents' attitudes, etc. So parents have got to be really careful. But likewise, from a positive viewpoint, if parents are really positive about maths, then their children are as well, because they think, oh wow, really enjoy maths. This takes me back to another research study I did. I was looking at, I was interviewing primary and secondary teachers to ask them about what they thought were the facilitating factors that enable success in maths. And basically, even though I hadn't asked anything about emotions came up. Two of the teachers were very fearful of maths, one primary, one secondary. The primary one was because they said, she was told at home, we're a creative household, we're arty, we're musical, we're not maths people. And the teacher took that on board, and which gave her a fear of maths. The secondary teacher who had a fear of maths, hers was developed from the teacher, because she basically said that when she was younger she missed a bit of maths because she was ill, and it was fractions, she mentioned, and she just said that gap. I remember what she said to me. She said that gap in my knowledge plagued me. She said it plagued her for the rest of her school maths, and she just said she never got on top of it. Her teacher, she remembered at a parents' evening as well, she said that her teacher said to her parents, she really struggles with maths, she doesn't do well. And she really, when I spoke to her, she sounded so bitter, really bitter, that this teacher had this opinion of her. And so she has such a negative impact. But the other two, I had one positive primary teacher. She loves maths, and she said her mother absolutely loved maths, so she took it on board. But she said her father didn't like maths, but that didn't affect her. So again, I mentioned before last week in last week's workshop in that children sort of tend to imitate the same-sex role model. So daughters with their mothers, sons with their fathers. So of course, so this intrigued me because she didn't take on board her father's opinion of maths. She took on board her mother's, and she was very, very positive. So it just shows, yeah, absolutely. But what we've got to be careful of is that we need both teachers to be positive about maths and parents at home, so it's congruent. They are congruent. If you have teachers just desperately trying to get, build maths resilience or reduce maths anxiety in school, but obviously they go home and their parents have a very negative view, well, we're not going to win there. So it is a very, very complicated situation, and so social, the social world of the learner is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before teaching online, I had in some ways the privilege of going to people's homes and being a guest, and I did a lot of residential teaching, so I would be off to the countryside or other parts of the country, and I'd be their guest for 2-3 days. And once you lived with a family for 2-3 days,
Oh right! Oh wow!
you get to know pretty much everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's fascinating actually, because yeah, of course, parents have had their own life experience and journey with maths, and to give a more concrete story, like I had one family who had 4 children, and I started with the eldest one so he was doing A-level maths, and neither the mother or the father had done A-level maths, if I remember right. Yes. So it wasn't that, I mean, they were very proud that this child is doing A-level maths, and he wants to go into engineering, and I did engineering, so I was very keen to help him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we just did a crash thing in upper 6, and he did very well. He went from a D2 and A. He got into engineering, and then the parents sort of saw how his life and demeanor changed, and he became very confident at other things as well. And then I ended up teaching the brother who was younger than him, who had dyspraxia, dyscalculia. He had a bunch of special needs, and to be honest, that he was the first special needs child I tutored, and I learned a lot about tutoring from him. He ended up passing GCSE, even did AS level. He passed that.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
And then once the eldest had set the scene, and the one that had special needs had also set the scene, well, obviously the next 2 younger ones had to go and do A-level maths, so they also did A-level maths. So this family, where both mom and dad had not done A-level maths, suddenly became all 4 children have done A-level maths. So they've like completely transformed and gone the other way, and it just started from that one child, the one eldest child. And for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm into this. Is you can change an entire family's life, not just the child's life.
Yeah, I think that I think I have 2 points there. Actually, I'll note one down in case I forget, because I want to follow on from that. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have to be careful. So that's an amazing job that you've done there, Atul. I bet you were very proud, I'm sure, very chuffed to bits. But obviously, parental sort of comparing siblings, that's something again that we have to be aware of, that they're not, our children, they've got the same parents, but it doesn't mean that they have the same likes, dislikes, interests, etc. So we have to be really careful with parents comparing siblings as well, and pushing them just because, for example, their older sibling has done really well in maths or whatever, they expect the next sibling to also do well. So it can't be generalized, basically. But the second point I was thinking about that related actually again to those teachers that I interviewed, because a couple of them had worked in in schools outside the UK. And so they gave me an insight into factors associated with maths anxiety that I didn't know about because I've only been in the UK. And basically, one teacher came from I think the Caribbean. They said that it was very similar societal perspective of maths, in that, you know, oh, we don't need maths, what do you need it for? You know, I've done really well. And they said, so from the UK, and so it's fine not to be good at maths because it's commonly accepted. But another teacher, so she worked in Hong Kong, and I think Dubai, and then UK. And she said in Hong Kong, because they value education so much and value maths so much in particular, everyone, it's expected that you want to do well in maths. And so as a society, if you didn't like maths, that was actually embarrassing if you didn't like maths. And so it's that filtered down, you know, through the families and through generations, in that, yeah, I want to be good at maths. So they are personally interested in it, as opposed to societies like ours, where it's like, oh, what do you need maths for? You know, it's never done me any harm, etc. So definitely, again, it's those relationships in your lives, sort of shaping your own opinions and attitudes of maths.
Yeah, there's so much can come from that. Yeah, I mean, with the parents, I will always make sure they don't compare siblings. It's a very natural thing to do. You're the parents of 2 or 3 children, or for however many, but it's like, so and so is like this, but so and so isn't. But they're totally not different. They're totally different individuals. They're in a different world. Still staying on the parents theme, and a few questions coming in. We've got lots of them coming in, actually.
Oh, right, okay.
Mr. Day is asking, interesting, how do we help the parents?
Yeah, Mr. Day, is that Louis? So in terms of the parents, I think that the trouble is that the parents, because they're very maths anxious themselves, they sort of, for example, I've got a couple of very maths anxious mums who are really pushing for their children. And when they contact me, it's really, really clear they're maths anxious, because they're so desperate for their child to pass. It's as though they're living their life through their child, wanting them to pass, which will ease that anxiety for them. But I think with parents, unfortunately, unless they actually have they see the value in maths, they've got to see the value in it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get them on board. So something like maths will obviously, you know, lack of numeracy skills, talked about this last week, costs the UK economy like 20 billion a year. And there are a lot of parents who think, oh yeah, I'll be proud of my child if they were good at literacy and reading, but less so with numeracy. So they have to see the value in it. But the trouble is, because a lot of them, studies suggest that they are maths anxious themselves, so they will avoid it. They will avoid maths because they want to avoid that horrible feeling associated with doing maths. And that is very, very difficult. So I think the first thing we need to do is get parents to see that the value of maths for their child and what it can do for them in the future. It will let them access far more, they have far more options in their lives if they have the maths. And I think maybe that's one way of doing it, getting the parents to understand how beneficial it will be for their children, especially with this pandemic. Perhaps, you know, we've got a lot of children who are, obviously they've had such a disruption in their learning. We've got a lot of unemployed now, and this will continue. So maths, you know, we want it to be highly valued, because it's highly valued by employers as well.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, this has come up in so many maths chat lives, but just understanding exponentiation, what the R value is, and why it's such a significant marker. Like above 1 it's growth, that means uncontrolled growth. Below 1 it's decay, because yeah, our like cognitive bias is to think linear, right? It's not exponentiation. It's kind of unintuitive. We have to like really thrash the numbers out, see the bars kind of grow up exponentially.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just read out some other comments. Yeah, again, Mr. Day was on the earlier when we were talking about the developmental differences between teenagers and young children. Yeah, I think we forget they are just children sometimes. He's saying.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
Ronald Johnson on Facebook, again from very early on. Excellent talk. It's always important to separate the mastery of a subject from the value of the student. The fact that you are struggling at the moment with some concept has nothing to do with your value, your own value, or necessarily your intelligence.
Sorry, say that again. So was that just a comment? Or?
That's just a comment, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah,
So
absolutely. No, yeah, nice.
Separating out that actually your value is separate to your self-esteem, value, etc. It's separate to the thing you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will just go through. We've got Christine Morton on Twitter. It's just a more general question. How best can we support children who have maths anxiety?
I think, this comes up with the strategies I was talking about in the workshop. I think with maths anxiety, as I say, because it's got two dimensions, it's got the cognition, so our thoughts, our worry, etc., and also our emotions. So to support a child with maths anxiety, you need to find out, is it how they're feeling or is it what they're thinking? Because strategies will be different depending on what type it is. As I mentioned in the workshop last week, if you can't get to the thinking part until you sorted out the emotion part. So when a child is maths anxious and it's the feelings, their emotions are taking over. And so if, for example, the amygdala, which is the emotion center of our brain, what happens is that when we perceive something from our environment, the stimuli, etc., so it goes to the thalamus, which is the relay center, and then that gets sent out to the neocortex, which is the thinking brain. However, if the threat is mild, then the thinking brain can influence the amygdala, which is the emotion center. And so we can be rational about it and think, right, okay, I can still think, no, this is being silly. I can do this. However, if someone's very maths anxious in terms of how they feel about it, the thalamus will just send the information to the neocortex and the amygdala. The amygdala basically reacts much faster than the thinking part of our brain because it has an evolutionary advantage. It's to ensure survival. And so regardless of whether it's a physical threat or not, maths is perceived as a physical threat. And so what will happen is that the amygdala will override the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, and disengage all the cognitive resources, because the sympathetic branch of our autonomic nervous system, that's where the heart rate goes up, oxygen's pumping around, adrenaline's going, basically for us to fight or flight. And so if a child is in that state, they have disengaged from their thoughts. So we need to calm them down. And so deep breathing exercises are really, really good because they stimulate, so that taking in of deep breaths, coming out again, it actually stimulates the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. So that is where it calms us down. And basically, once you've got the child calm, then you can actually deal with their thoughts and talk to them about it. But you cannot do anything until you sort out the emotional side of things, because it will hijack the thinking part.
Yeah, I mean that's yes, that's really great to hear. I mean, I'll go into like a more concrete example of some of my duties, and I specialize in dyscalculia. I often get I've got students who I think when I was training with my dyscalculia mentor, actually Patricia Babti, who also does work with Brian Butterworth, actually. And I think she said something to me like, essentially the child thinks there's a tiger right there, and they're in this flight or fight mechanism, so they're not going to engage with the maths. They're in complete shock and fear. They want to get out of it. And she gave an example of a child who was given a maths problem in a primary classroom, and he just looked at the problem, screamed, tore the piece of paper, just ran out. And you know, she said that's actually the correct reaction if your flight and fight mechanism is kicked in and your neocortex, which is the more rational part, isn't able to reason with that. And that's they just go into this fight or flight. And I've had tutees on this kind of more extreme anxiety. I know you talked about extreme anxiety as well, which is something we can talk about. And you get this volatility where you see if they see a problem and it suddenly kind of triggers this flight or fight anxiety, and it's impossible to do any kind of maths, any kind of reasoning with them. You have to actually just pull out of the situation completely. Like everyone's got to like just stop and take a moment and get the breathing if necessary, or completely stop and then come back to it with a different type of question.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, so maths is actually still considered a physical threat to our survival. So the amygdala acts exactly the same, whether it is a physical threat or not. The deep breathing, though, I would like to say it does take a lot of practice. So, for example, for my students, I've shown them one. So for my year 7, when I used to teach year 7 nurture group, and they were in that sort of fight or flight, you know, so trying to breathe with them. So you have to do it with them there and then. It's quite tricky. And what we want is for our children to practice it so that they can do it whenever they feel anxious, so that they can calm themselves down. What we don't want is for them to just suddenly start trying to use it in an exam or something like that. It's the first time, because it does take quite a bit of getting used to and just feeling calm. I do it myself, and I can really feel everything going calm. So
going into that Zen state, as I joked about in our Twitter DM. Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said about Eastern philosophies, about meditation and kind of mindfulness. It's all coming into apps and things. Yeah, okay, that's great. I'll just look at any other questions that are there. So yeah, if you're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, do keep them coming. Because I had lots of questions myself, so this is an opportunity actually just to...
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Any chance to, because I don't think, not enough of us, I don't think, realise that the sheer impact it has. And of course, you know, it's devastating for children. They have it for the rest of their lives. I showed some of the quotes last week from maths anxious individuals rather. And unfortunately, then you can imagine it just gets passed down through generations and generations. So it's a cycle that's really, really difficult to get out of. But we've got to try and do something about it. So.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm just looking at one of his slides. We talked about it briefly, but there's gender differences as well, which as obvious as it didn't. I mean, your thoughts on your research on that was very, very revealing, actually. So if you can talk around that as well, like how that affects differently.
Okay, was there any particular slide you were looking at?
It's gender differences, social learning theory, stereotype threats.
Oh, okay, gender differences. Right. Okay, apologies. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, since giving the workshop last week, it has really made me think even more about gender differences and social learning theory. I think those two are absolutely key to trying to start dealing with this maths anxiety, how to approach it. So social learning theory, I've talked about a couple of times already. So Bandura's, where children observe those around them, and so we as adults, we are models. So how we behave how we feel, what we think of maths will be taken on board by those by the children. And of course, it's not just teachers either. But as children get into adolescence, obviously their peers play a much bigger part as being role models too. And so, we really have to, as a teacher, we have to be really, really aware of how what we think of maths. Unfortunately, there are maths teachers who actually don't like maths, teaching maths, and of course they will pass that on. So we've got to be really, really careful with that. The stereotype threat. So females, in nations where education, equal opportunities for both male and female, despite similar maths performance, females consistently rate themselves as higher in maths anxiety. And so stereotype threat is like, oh, well, girls, girls can't do maths. And so we really, really got to be careful about this, because clearly girls, there's not much difference. Well, there's no difference in terms of their performance, and yet females rate much higher in maths anxiety. And this leads to the attribution bias, in that how successes and failures are perceived by males and females differ. So success, males take it in internally, it's because I'm so great, I'm really smart, etc. Whereas females, if they experience success, they think, oh, that was just luck. If it's in an exam, I was just lucky with those questions that were asked, etc. And so in the 1970s, this was quite dominant. In the 90s, this was found to disappear, except for STEM fields. So I think in 2016, Lacrosse, and co. found that they basically did a study with STEM undergrads, and they found that there was no different, although the gender differences had disappeared in terms of successes and failures, how they were perceived, not in the STEM field. So any failures, if it's male failure, they'll say, oh, I wasn't feeling well that day, so it was external, whereas female was internal, as in, oh, I'm not smart enough to do this, I don't have the skills. And unfortunately, women exhibit the same attribution bias as men, and that's really, really tough. How do we get over that? And I just wonder, from having talked about this, whether imposter syndrome. A lot of women suffer from imposter syndrome. They're in a position of authority, or whatever it is, and think, oh, and then doubting their abilities, even though they've got that job because they're well qualified, experienced, etc. Men don't seem to have that problem. Do men suffer imposter syndrome as much as women? Because men are much better at talking themselves up, blagging it, if you like. And yet women just doubt themselves, and so won't push themselves. And in terms of stereotype and attribution bias, that also relates to working memory, because it takes up the working memory resources needed to complete the complex task at hand. So they are something that we need to deal with. Stereotype threat. Now, I read some interesting research on stereotype threat, in that if what they did was some studies, they had a control and two different experimental conditions. So the control, that they were asked to do some maths work, whatever, maths test. And so they compared control, where they weren't told anything, just went on, did the maths test. An experimental one where they were told about stereotype threat, as in, oh, girls aren't as good at maths as boys. And then the other one where they were told about the stereotype threat, but they were actually taught as well that it's nonsense. Girls are, girls and boys, no difference in how they do maths. And they found that the stereotype threat plus the teaching, being told that girls and boys, there's no difference, actually, then they showed no maths anxiety. So perhaps that is something we need to tell our children. So going back to one of the viewers asking about how to deal with maths anxiety, perhaps this is something we should teach to our classes so that girls realise actually there's no difference in boys and girls maths performance, and yet there's this perception of this, that girls can't do it. Perhaps by teaching them that, we will offload this sort of fear of conforming to this negative stereotype.
Gosh, yeah, there's a lot in there. Yeah, I mean, definitely there's just the awareness of it, and also, yeah, just be very clear about it. Yes, there's no, you can learn. There's no difference, and just be trying to battle that stereotype that's yeah, that's passed down for whatever reason. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking just a couple of stories while you were talking about that as well. I had a student who was just pulled out of school, was homeschooled year 10 onwards, and she had real performance anxiety around exams, actually, and there was a whole other bunch of social reasons for which she was taken out of school, but because she was taken out of school and she did have to do her GCSEs in an exam center, which would be, and so the nearer it came to that, preparing her for that exam in year 11, homeschool equivalent of year 11, just sensed that she had this real fear of going back into an exam hall. She would just say these things like, you know, that it feels like a very sterile environment, cold, and you could just sense that the anxiety is kicking in. And I knew that this child was thoroughly prepared. I mean, she would, you know, she was almost, I was teaching physics, and she did, like, she absolutely nailed it in the end in the exam, but the barrier became, in the last 2 or 3 months for me, was actually the fact that all of these anchored feelings around performance and exam halls, etc., had to be tackled. That became my main thing to tackle, and how I had to think about it from I mean, I had no training on it. I had to think about it from my own life experience as what did I do as a musician? Like, I've got a gig coming up. What do I do? Well, I practice in my room, I practice in another room, I practice in different places, so that when I perform in front of a lot of people in a certain setting, I'm ready for it. So yeah, I just I asked her to do her past papers in the kitchen, in another room, go to a public library that's a public enough space, go to these different, so there's this and later on I read, I think it's in Mr. Barton's book, that this variation, this is an actual type of variation, the variation in space. And if you get that variation, and then the sterile exam hall is just another one of many different places you practice doing a paper in. And actually, yeah, I even taught her some techniques about, all I knew at the time was about just, if you feel a question is really stressing you out and you're just kind of stuck in it, and it's affecting all your confidence, just it doesn't matter, you can lose a minute in an exam, just take time out, just take some deep breaths in, just kind of become aware of the situation and kind of let go of that question, and then move on to the next one.
No, completely agree. I think there is also something called choking under pressure, again, which uses up working memory resources, and so because they really are desperate to do well, but they've got this worry that they won't do as well as they are capable of, and it's just sort of getting these concerns down. So exactly as you said, I think one of the things that I say to my students as well is that don't look at everybody else around you, because they'll all be scribbling furiously away, and if you just have a sort of a mind blank, just do your own thing, calm yourself down. So either with the breathing, flick through the paper and just have a look, just to familiarize yourself, because you don't need to just start frantically writing as soon as that time, right, okay, it started. And I also let people know that just because students are writing furiously, doesn't mean actually what they're doing is good quality. So you can't tell by what they're doing. So it's just trying to get them to sort of calm down. That there have been studies, both lab and field studies, have shown that students who just immediately prior to the exam, so before it's actually started, actually writing, they had a creative writing task where they had to write down their concerns, everything else. And what that did, they found that benefited both the cognition and the emotional side of maths anxiety, because they were offloading it from their working memory, which means that they had the resources available to continue with the task at hand, rather than it. If you have worrying thoughts caught in there, it's acting like a secondary task, that you're sort of attending to the worrying thoughts, but you also need to attend to your exam. So yes, just the sort of getting your composure back, trying to block everybody else out as well, and just do your own thing. Not be afraid to just do your own thing.
Yeah, there's so, I mean, performance is a, sort of a whole different area. It's performance, really. It's performance is not learning. It's one of Mark McCourt's quotes. Learning and performance are two very different things. That's a performance. And yeah, I mean, I think I've also heard, I had another student who was very thoroughly prepared, but she was in a set with a lot of girls who weren't thoroughly prepared. So they were like really panicking before the exam. They're standing outside the exam hall for 5 or 10 minutes. And she said, well, my friends, they were all crying, and I started crying as well. And then she went into the exam, and she said she made a meal of that paper. I felt responsible for her performance because I was her coach, really. And so I had to think, well, why did this happen? And this is obviously she just never kind of recovered from that state of anxiety and that kind of communal worry that they all had together. But she was a very well prepared student. So in the next paper, I had to devise a strategy. I had to say, actually, you are with your friends and they're not prepared, or it is what it is. You are going to be outside and you're going to be chatting about these things, but once you're in the exam hall, just kind of recenter yourself and think about all the times you were doing the past paper in your home or in your school, and you're performing well. And again, if things get difficult, take a deep breath in, but try and come back to those successful memories rather than what's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think perhaps anxiety is catching. So social learning theory, you imitate. So anxiety is catching, but yeah, I agree in that, sort of do your own thing, try and sort yourself out. And as I say, learning is challenging. It's not meant to be easy. And I know that my daughter, she's done really well in maths. So she's just finished her undergrad maths degree. She's now doing her master's. And she's really worked really, really hard. So she's got, she's been doing excellently well. And in fact, she worked so hard. I just say to her, look, please have a break. I'm not one of those parents who are pushy, because I'm just looking at, right, what's happening here. And so you need some quality time out. So she works too hard. So then I have to pull her back, etc. But I think that's the trouble, mentioned this last week, in that a lot of children think, I can't be good at maths because I don't find it easy. Well, if it was easy, learning would have no value. And so it is meant to be challenging. We have to normalise that challenging maths will cause some discomfort, cause some anxiety, but that is normal, because you're being pushed, you're being challenged, you've been pushed out of your comfort zone. So getting stuck, making mistakes, making mistakes is such a valuable part of learning. And again, it's something we as teachers have to model. So I say to my students, I love it if you spot my mistakes, because it means that you're paying attention. And also it helps me out, because sometimes I might do something, I might make the odd mistake. And even if you think I've made a mistake and I haven't, well, so what? Good for you. Good for you for actually saying something, because I could have made a mistake. So I really want to normalize the making mistakes, the being stuck, and it being like a two-way process, you know, where we're co-constructing the knowledge together, if you like. It's not just a one-way thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's so much in there actually. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to some other. There's one other question from Darren Elgar again on Twitter. I have some pupils who prefer to record their maths thinking using whiteboards and do not want to use paper and pen due to the permanence of any mistake, in quotes. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, right. I have to say, a lot of girls have perfectionist tendencies, and so they want their work to be as pristine as possible. And they, again, it's going to be an avoidance. It's again, it's sort of Skinner's negative reinforcement, in that they're trying to avoid anything, the unpleasant feelings with making mistakes, whether it's just the presentation or whatever. But I think if they want to do it on the whiteboard before transferring it, absolutely fine to start with. But it would be great. It would be great if we could just get them to just accept, you know, but gently, in a gentle way, because they're obviously very anxious about showing mistakes or whatever. But I would, yes, definitely encourage, let them work it out. That's absolutely brilliant. Writing it down, that also frees up those working memory resources, especially for a lot of students, especially with learning difficulties, who have, you know, poor working memory capacity, even just in class as well, general class. So that offloads, so that's absolutely great. But I would try and encourage, if possible, don't push it obviously, but try and encourage them to see that it's absolutely fine to have. So I would say in their book, because what I don't like is because mistakes are so valuable, I let students know, but it's really valuable to see that, because then you can see, oh, right, you've learned from that. But if you have it on a whiteboard, you've rubbed it all out, you can't see what you did, so you can't learn from that. So what I would do then in the book is just like have like a neat area, maybe, and then like a working out area. If they don't want to look at it, maybe do it in the back of their book or something like that, but capture all their workings, because it's really good to see over. Because I say to the students, this is still really valuable revision. When you make the mistakes, then it also helps with your thought processes. Oh, what did I do there? Why did I go wrong here? And it's all part of the learning. One study I did, I was looking at what students attend to in maths class, to see what type of knowledge was transferred. And when I looked at their books, it was all absolutely pristine. So I interviewed about 5 of them. I went into about 3 lessons, or one after the other. So I had a sequence of lessons to look at, got all the resources. So I sort of knew what the teacher was teaching, etc. And when I looked at their books, they were identical. I couldn't tell really anything. All I could see was, yeah, loads of ticks, really pristinely presented. I couldn't tell anything from them at all. And yet when I interviewed them to ask them, what did you do here or whatever, they didn't know, because there was no clues as to how they got to that point. So if possible, try and capture all the workings. And if they just can't bear to see it, have it in the back of the book or something, or when they get a bit braver, have it, just, I don't know, line off part of their page. So you've got the workings next to the work, so you can look between them. They are valuable learning resources. So
yeah, fantastic tips. Yeah, it's really for when I was learning, actually, my dad was a maths tutor many years ago before he did his job, but he tutored me for a few months actually at one point, and he
Oh.
said, make a rough column on the right hand side and do all your rough
Oh,
work
yeah, there we
there.
go. There we go.
And then on the
But
left
yeah,
side, I sort of a tutee straight away as Darren asked that question, and you articulated as that sense of perfectionism with handwriting. I mean, I work on this completely online realm with digital paper anyway, so there's
oh
no
yes, I
cost
know
of
you've talked
making a
about bit
mistake.
paper, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
on there, you just press Z on your keyboard and it undoes it, just cleans it completely, just undo every mistake. But it's worth having the mistake because you can see exactly what happened. And to use computer science talk, it's a debugging process. The debugging process you learn more from sometimes than the actual process. You have got to learn that. Okay, brilliant. So well, I think that's pretty much all the questions that people have. They've stopped coming in. They've slowed down. So yeah, we can kind of start wrapping up there. If you got any last sort of thoughts to share? I'm just looking through your presentation notes. Yeah,
I think,
final
yeah,
thought.
well, I think final thoughts. I mean, I think last weekend's workshop, I really wanted it to be hard hitting in that I wanted it to be thought provoking, and really show the devastating impact that maths anxiety can have on a child for the rest of their lives, not only for the rest of their lives, but their children, because it is going to go through, to their children. So it is something that's so important. And so I think the quotes that I showed up, and I was just amazed at all the, people that I've spoken to about mass anxiety. It still hits them, it's so still raw with them, because the memories, they've got such vivid memories, because they're so emotional. It's not something we can afford to neglect. So when we come to, when we talk about pedagogy, retrieval practice, cognitive load, dual processing, they are all just the cognition side of just a cognitive perspective, but that is not all that learning is. We are not information processors. That's how the cognitive perspective came about when computers came out. The perspective was, all right, okay, what there's input, there's output, but we are human. We are social animals. We are not like computers. We are not just information processors. Something goes in, something comes out. We process it, comes out. We are so much more than that. And our social, emotional side of learning, we can't, in terms of maths, we cannot afford to neglect that. So clearly, cognition, very, very important. But if our emotions can completely derail the cognition, well, clearly then cognitive science, we need more than that. That is only one perspective of looking at learning. We need to see the child as a whole. So talking about how they feel, their social relationships, both in school, out of school, their peers, everything else. There's so much more to it. Maths just seems so different to all the other subjects. We have people who absolutely love maths, but unfortunately we have a far, far greater number of people who absolutely loathe maths and are absolutely petrified of maths for whatever reason they may be. And we've got to do something about it.
Wow, yeah, that's really, really, yeah. So again, that's a very good, hard-hitting message, because we can get so just wrapped up by the pedagogical and technical elements, whereas you're showing the whole thing as like everything, the social, emotional, identity level, everything. There's just so much going on. Well, I'm very, very grateful for your time. Again, I know it's two weekends back to back with
No,
all
thank
of
you,
this.
Atul. Thank you for inviting me. I was very chuffed, I have to say. So I hope people have found it useful. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for
No,
the
and
question.
I think your contribution to the community is going to be invaluable, because you have this knowledge from the cognitive side and the neuroscience side, and you're practicing classroom and the implications are profound of understanding this. And you know, I don't like maths, I hate maths, these things are, I'm hearing from adults as well in various groups, in the dyscalculia group, and there's so much, there's so much emotion involved in it. Maths is a highly emotional subject.
Yeah, definitely.
So brilliant. We're gonna wrap up there. I know, thanks Dee. Dee's also been contributing, no questions as such, but Dee's always, I'll just acknowledge her as well for all the great comments while
thank you,
we're talking. And so Maths Chat Live is every Saturday, and I hope to catch you again. I'm sure we haven't heard the last of you, so I'm sure we'll catch you at a maths conference, or a talk, and I will stop the live stream here, and then we can have a quick debrief. And,
all right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you everybody who's tuned in. I really appreciate it, and I hope you found it really well. Hope you got some benefit from it anyway. So thank you for taking some of your Saturday out to watch.
Thanks everyone, and you can of course keep the questions coming, and we're on Twitter anyway.